All right, everybody, welcome to the April 21st meeting for Environmental Matters Committee meeting. And for the record, all the members are present. And I'd like to entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
And I'd like to modify it a bit to move the Deputy City Manager presentation up to the front. We'll just move that. We'll do that maybe right after the approval of the minutes. And then we can get into the planning and zoning discussion after that.
So is that do we have to amend? I mean, do we modify then? What do we do?
You don't, yeah, it's fine. It's on the agenda. If you want to move it up, you can move it up. But she's not here yet, just to let you know.
Okay, oh, that's where she's going to be late. Well, maybe we should get the Tucker Street out of the way because that may have a bit more time sensitivity than the comp plan. Folks on the committee,
now.
Okay.
Yep.
What's that?
Popped on.
Jackie just popped on? Okay.
I move approval of the minutes.
A second.
Oh, wait, we need agenda approved first.
Oh.
So there was a second on the approval agenda. All those in favor, please say
Aye.
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 No.
Okay. Okay, minutes.
Is this a budget meeting?
Minutes.
I motion, wait a minute, where are we now? It's on the floor.
Minutes.
I motion that we approve the minutes from our last meeting.
Second.
All those in favor of approving the minutes, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, we'll move on to some of the presentations. I think we'll start off, Ms. Skyle, I see you're on now. You want to start with your report and then we could move into the Tucker Street and then we'll go to planning and zoning. Ms. Skyle, are you ready to give your report? Oh, there you are.
They're just trying to get.
And the cat. Let me get you and Ellie's cat on the screen.
Yeah, and I apologize for background noise. I got home and there's a whole construction site going on in my house right now. All right, so my report. So things that are going on that are new. We have Earth Week this week, and tonight I'm moderating an event for the Eastport Yacht Club where they've invited different nonprofit environmental groups to speak about initiatives and ways to collaborate. So I'll be providing some highlights of new programs for the city and then moderating that panel discussion. Tomorrow for our Earth Day event, where it's an Earth Day / Arbor Day / Bird Day event, we are planting 3 native trees in the Robinwood community with some community members that will be assisting the mayor. And these will be native trees that are also good habitat to satisfy our Bird City certification requirements and our Tree City requirements. And where the mayor will be announcing a new program for the city we're calling Replant Annapolis. This is will serve as like a sister program to the Replant Annapolis program that was initiated last year. And this will be a partnership between the city and the Anne Arundel County Watershed Stewards Academy. They recruit and train people from their communities to plant in their communities, and they call them tree troopers. And the Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay also provides some of the technical assistance and training, and the city will have to provide the funds to purchase the trees and any other materials. And they'll work with our city forester to identify sites for planting, and but then WSA and the Alliance will train these community members, and then they will have, there'll be some workforce training skills that will be gained through this, as well as community empowerment, improving your own community. And last year, I believe Anne Arundel County planted 4,000 trees and had 300 new recruits to participate in their program. Now, we can't do anything like that because we're so much smaller. We have some challenges being in a compact densely developed area. But I've asked Brian Adams to come up with some goals, some initial rough goals for us for tree planting and for recruiting people to become tree troopers. And as you know, we have a goal that we agreed to with Department of Natural Resources to achieve a tree canopy cover of 50% by 2036. This program will help us advance that goal, especially with the very limited budget that Brian Adams had last year, and probably again have this year, even though he's moved to planning and zoning. So the idea is that we would use watershed restoration funds for this program because we can get stormwater credit, and it can be used for our MS4 goals as well. I don't know if that will be feasible in the first year we do this. The first year for us, because I have to come up with a contract that I have to pass through legal and get appropriations for the program. We won't launch this program until 2022. Training for tree troopers in recruitment in the spring of 2022 for fall planting in 2022. But when I say that we might not be able to use watershed restoration funds, it's because we're operating under 2014 accounting guidance for MS4 permit, which it provides some stormwater credit for tree planting, but it's not as good as the 2020 guidance, which we will probably be operating under for our next permit in 2023. So I need to speak with Director Johnson about his willingness to provide funds out of the restoration fund for this program in its first year, because it doesn't generate a lot of IAT credit. So the mayor will be announcing that program tomorrow afternoon at 1:15 in Robinwood. And then on Friday, there is a brown bag discussion with Alderman Savage and Bob Gallagher, who is on our Board of Appeals, but is also very active with the Maryland League of Conservation Voters, and Randy Rowell from the Environmental Commission as well. And that will be at noon on Friday. And the mayor, yes. And then on Saturday, we had planned to clean up on West Street in an area that is next to what is the planned Poplar Trail. And I think that's going to be rained out, unfortunately. BG&E was going to participate as well. We're planning a backup date for that. And I think that was from 10 to 2, but it's probably because of rain is forecast 80% on Saturday. I think we're going to be rescheduling that cleanup. Also new, we are in the midst of planning, and we are launching a cigarette butt litter reduction campaign. It's a public education and behavior change campaign. We have a grant from DNR, and our subcontractor on this project is Annapolis Green, that worked with the city last year with our Plastic Free Annapolis campaign that was directed more at the service industry, the restaurants and hotels, and any other businesses that wanted to participate. And that was providing alternatives to plastic clamshells and plastic utensils and other plastic items that are used in the service industry, the food service industry, that is. This campaign will be a short campaign, about a month long, geared entirely at cigarette butt litter education. It's the most prevalent form of litter on shorelines and on beaches. DNR did a study 2 years ago, and they found it was by far the most prevalent form of litter. And it actually, tonnage-wise, accumulates. They're small pieces, but they really accumulate into a lot of tons of waste that goes into our waterways. And they also contain chemicals that are toxic to wildlife and people, and they can get into our drinking water. And we ingest these animals as well. So that will be going on. It will probably launch mid-May to mid-June. I have to have report back to DNR in June. We also, Annapolis Green also obtained a grant. It's not a city grant, but a Annapolis Green grant that we'll be working with Annapolis Green on for a 6-month composting pilot program. This is a fixed site drop-off. It will be in Truxton Park, where we did the pumpkin composting last year by the skate park. We'll probably launch it near the end of the summer and have it run through the winter, because we want to be able to capture the pumpkin drop-offs again at the end of October and the beginning of December. And so I'm working with them on the logistics for that, as well as a pilot program that I know that Public Works submitted as part of its budget package, a neighborhood curbside composting program. And we selected Hunt Meadows as our neighborhood pilot neighborhood, and we're determining how long to run that neighborhood composting pilot program. And the data from both the Annapolis Green Project, the fixed site, and the neighborhood composting pilot project will be gathered so as to provide backup for reasons why we need an entire citywide neighborhood composting, curbside composting program. And for the site up by the solar park that we're looking at to turn into a composting facility for the city, which will reduce the miles traveled to compost where we take refuse to PG County, and some other refuse goes over to the Eastern Shore. So we can reduce significantly the transportation costs and save the city in the realm of several $1 million in what we spend right now, especially if we are able to compost the sludge from the wastewater treatment facility that we where we set, we run that right now with the county, but we pay about $1.5 million to dispose of sludge right now, and that could be going to a composting facility, and it would help more that the more refuse you bring to the composting facility, the more cost benefit we see in terms of operating it and making it a worthwhile endeavor. And then we would look at the second part of it. We would look at the third part of it would be food scraps. So that would have to be tied to a curbside or a fixed site or both neighborhood program. So initially for the composting facility up by the solar park, we will be looking at yard waste, secondarily at the wastewater sludge, and then third at food waste from residences and businesses. Let's see what else is going on. Let me see. Got a lot of different things happening right now. We're participating in Greenscape that's going on right now. There are 72 Greenscape projects that will be going in the ground on Saturday all over the city. People signed up in February and March, and then the seed and plant pickup is today and tomorrow. And we're also providing through the city manager's office seed packets that were donated by the county. And again, Annapolis Green has access to some of them. And Racine Hodo, our environmental programs coordinator, is getting some of those seed packets to a group that Tola is working with. They're going to be planting black-eyed Susans in a garden in the Clay Street area. Black-eyed Susans are natural pollinators. They attract pollinators, butterflies, birds, bees, and others. And so they'll be creating a pollinator garden in the Clay Street area. Also, I worked with Public Works on the new Public Works maintenance facility to make sure that we're getting adequate stormwater treatment, and maximum stormwater treatment in there, that is. And I worked with their developer to make sure that we have EV charging units in the staff parking area, and they will be fitting the interior of the garage to be EV ready for light duty trucks when we convert the fleet over entirely, including light duty trucks. Still working with BG&E on new sites for EV charging throughout the city, as well as with the Maryland Department of General Services for state-owned streets to get chargers there. And then I'm going to help them down the road with some other locations that are within the historic district, because those would take some more time to work through the Historic Preservation Commission's process. So we're working on the sites that are just outside of the historic district to make it a little easier to get chargers in there. So those are the highlights, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Yeah, thank you. Sounds like you have a lot of excellent programs that are underway, and also with plenty of things you're working on. I had a couple questions, and one is kind of coming off of the conversation, the presentation to the finance committee on the budget and the office, and you had a whole list of things there. And one of the things I was thinking I wanted to mention was I saw that yourself and I guess Ms. Hodo are still working on some of the MS4 work, the permit work. And I'm just wondering, and maybe this is something maybe I should mention more to the city manager, but now that we have hired, I believe we've hired a second stormwater engineer for the city, I'm wondering if Public Works should take on those responsibilities, the MS4, since, at least maybe we should talk about that transition, at least in the future, so that it frees up your office. But I know that Ms. Hodo's position is I think at least partially funded by the watershed fund, but
It is.
that's not a huge amount of money. I think we figure out somewhere else to get that if we need to. But I don't know. Do you think that'd be helpful to kind of free up Ms. Hodo's?
Yeah, I think it would. Yes, she is working mostly on the public outreach, but she does public outreach and education as well as staff education components. But she did go on quite a few site visits this year, and both Racine and I get involved with facilitating some of the glitches that occur between permitting and the nonprofits. And Racine also is spearheading a effort to streamline and the permitting process and getting input from all departments of the city to do that, which is pretty near completion right now. All of these things take up a lot of time. For example, this was the first year I worked out with the Chesapeake Bay Trust, our memorandum of understanding, which allows the city to contribute money through our water restoration fund to projects that the trust will solicit and manage and fund with city money, but and then the city is part of the technical review team, and we are part of the team that makes recommendations on those projects that are submitted for city consideration to the trust. Racine went on all the site visits. Racine and I have participated in those reviews, and it's a lot of time when there's only two of us right now with all the other initiatives, and we have a lot of energy and transportation initiatives and other certifications and carbon capture and all the things we're trying to do for climate change and especially sea level rise. So with only two people in our office, we are stretched very thin. And there's some things like the greenhouse gas goals and baseline we need to finish, which has taken way more time than it should have because that was one of Racine's tasks. But both of us are kind of pulled in a lot of directions. So we probably need to sit down and talk about which items would make sense to take off our plate and put either entirely in planning and zoning or entirely in public works, and just have a better balance.
Yeah. Okay. Well, good. Yeah, it sounds like that'd be good conversation to have at some point. Another thing that came up from the presentation of the budget I wanted to ask about was, I think you mentioned you secured an agreement so we could use the critical area fee in lieu money on other projects besides just the originally limited scope. I think it had to only be spent on mitigation in the 100-foot buffer or
right. It was
critical area.
Right. It was in the critical area for tree planting only in the critical area because that's where we get the flow from. But we finally completed an MOU just a few months ago with the Critical Area Commission, which allows us an expanded use of that fee in lieu, which is completely separate from the development fee in lieu for trees. This is when you work in the critical area only. So it allows us to do all sorts of plantings now in the critical area where there are bushes, pollinator gardens. We can do living shorelines now. We can do restoration projects in the critical area, RSCs, all sorts of different BMPs. And we can also, and the Annapolis Conservancy Board is very happy about this, we can use those funds for survey work that we would need to do before putting a conservation easement on a property. So for example, I know the Conservancy Board is pretty excited to put a conservation easement on Truxton Park and also on Hawkins Cove. And those are, high ticket items and that we don't have funds for to do that kind of work. So we can now use the critical area fee in lieu for conservation easement work, including surveys.
Yeah, that's good because I think for my colleagues' sake, you may recall we raised the fee in lieu for not just the forest conservation, but also we did it for critical area. Ross is losing light over there.
Where the lights go out.
Yeah.
But we increased the fee in lieu for critical areas, so we hopefully will have some additional funds there to use on some projects. And yeah, it sounds promising. We might actually be able to use some of this to maybe address some of the erosion in Truxton Park, for example, which is obviously a big contributor in terms of pollution. It might be worthwhile, even if they can only get I think that's certainly worthwhile mitigation.
Yeah.
They're not going to get to that anytime soon.
There was one other issue I should mention. I have been working closely with Eric Lashinsky on the comp plan and making recommendations to him on where to include more environmental concerns and address vulnerabilities and issues. And I think he's done a good job of incorporating environmental concerns throughout the plan. And, when I spoke to him, we started going over the different parts of the plan. I said, every single part of that plan, there's an environmental issue. Yeah. And it just goes throughout the entire plan, and he revised it to reflect that. I know that we need to work on some of the goals, and I need to take a harder look at that and see look at some of the other comp plans from other cities. I think Bevan from the Environmental Commission provided him some examples as well. We're looking at how they address environmental concerns. There may be some helpful language and goals in some of these other plans. But I encourage, because we were getting requests from different environmental groups to have meetings with him. And I know he's already had about 100 in-person and virtual meetings with different groups on the comp plan. I suggested to him, and he went with this idea, that we hold one environmental stakeholder meeting on the comp plan to look just at the environmental issues. So he has set that up for May 6th, I believe, from 7 to 9 p.m. That's the tentative hold date we have right now. And has an invitation out to environmental stakeholders that I helped him identify people.
Can you check on that date? I think I remembered the 5th, but
let me just double check it for you. Got it, wrote it down, in fact.
Okay. And I just have one last question, and then I'll turn it to the colleagues if they have any questions.
It is May the 5th. May the 5th is the date we're holding right now, from 7 to 9. And it's open to everybody, but we're sending invitations, obviously, to environmental stakeholders and limit it to the environmental concerns.
Good, and I hope you can join us for the conversation later with planning and zoning about the comp plan. Mm-hmm. And one other last question is on the tree canopy, because I know the tree canopy is going to come up when we get to the conversation with the comp plan anyway. But do you have an update? I think Brian was working on planning and zoning. Mr. Adams was working on a tree canopy plan.
He is, and we had the tree canopy assessment was completed last year, but it's based on 2017 data, so it's already a little old. And, it shows that we're losing trees, especially, over in Fred's ward, in Ward 6, so in residential areas. So, we're at probably about 42% tree canopy, but we're sliding backwards now. And so, this Replant Annapolis and other initiatives are really important. And especially because Brian's budget was really, really drastically cut in the last year. So he is, I asked Brian when he was still with OEP, once we get this canopy assessment done, we really need to put forward a strategic plan for how we're going to get to 50% by 2036. And, with goals for each year and what it would cost to achieve those goals. And that needs to be woven into the comp plan.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think we'll definitely, again, be talking about this more in the comp plan. I saw a hand up from Alderwoman Tierney.
Yeah,
and then Alderwoman.
First, yes. This was brought up at the budget meeting this morning. I'll just say it this way. I think we have to find money for Brian. Our trees are maturing, and we have a tree canopy goal. And just on the experience I've had with Brian, he's pulled in so many different directions. And, when it gets to the point, where he can't, and this is not his fault at all. But when it gets to a point where he can't service a tree, that means we have a problem. You know what I'm saying? I think we have to find something in our budget to to offset that. And I'll try to scrub through and find some money. Yeah, we're not supposed to add any money, but no, I mean, I see it. It's at a critical point. I see no choice if we want this to be. Do you agree? I mean,
oh, absolutely. I agree. This has been frustrating for the last year or so. Trees are aging out, but also we have residents that are just taking trees down and paying, the fine that Brian slaps them with, and a fine is not going to replace a 80-year-old tree, and the canopy and the cooling effect that provides, the carbon capture, the habitat it provides. Putting in a tree, even if it's 6-8 foot tree, is what we usually require people to put in, or pay about $375 to us per tree. It just doesn't replace the tree in the end, and there are some people that are just willing to just do it and take the slap by being forced to pay a fine and replace a tree. We also have what Brian is kind of doing right now, because he's had such a limited budget, is just replacing trees. And we have a lot of places where we could put street trees in that he just doesn't have the funds to even do that. So he can't even keep up with what's aging out on our street trees and our public properties. And that doesn't even get to the additional trees we need to plant to meet our goal.
Yeah.
And it's not just a goal because we like to have that goal. I mean, these are real benefits to the city in terms of air quality and temperature, and reducing the temperature, and also for stormwater capture and treatment.
If we have a commercial project, a development, and the developer it has to save the trees and all that, is Brian the one that goes out and makes sure everything is kosher? Or
yes, he does inspections, and he can defer some of that to Charlie Brown, our environmental compliance inspector. But Brian is the arborist, the certified arborist.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I'm thinking of the DPW project coming up and all that. So
right.
The Friday thing, is that interactive, or is it a Facebook lunch? Just curious. The Friday.
There will be questions from the public.
Oh, okay.
As well, yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Alderman Arnett.
So not to worry, Alderman Tierney, Alderman Gay has apparently found a pot of $2.5 million. We can probably eke out.
I think I'm sure he has his shopping list of where he wants it to go.
So
put us in the hole for next year.
I am a little concerned about Hawkins Cove, because it feels like there's a tug of war between conservancy and making that another significant water access point, particularly given its proximity to Eastport Terrace and Harbor House. If it goes into the conservancy, does that mean that we cannot have communities serving things like slips and amenities on the shore?
No, it does not mean that. It just means if you put a conservation easement on a property, and generally when we've talked to MET about conservation, not just for that site, but for other sites in the city that we've identified, they're very interested in helping us get conservation easements on different city properties. But generally, you do the improvement that you want to do. So in this case, if we put in a living shoreline there and add some picnic benches, other benches, put a kayak launch there, improve the dock, dredge so we can do boats, whatever we want to do there, trail improvements, then they like you to do whatever you want to do first, and then go to them with a conservation easement. And part of the conservation easement will have limited conditions, things that you are allowed to do, certain improvements you're still allowed to make. And one generally always accepted condition is trail improvement or creation of trails, because that is another goal for Hawkins Cove, improving the trails that are there, connecting them over to Truxton Park and other places, in adding signage for the improvements that are done there. So those are all uses that are compatible with a general conservation easement.
Yeah, and Alderman Arnett, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Kyle, but I think you can also craft these conservation easements with specific language kind of tailored to the site.
Oh, absolutely.
So they often have carve outs or special language so people can expand on a house or put in some kind of public amenity, something like that. So that could be something that could be worked in potentially.
So in that same area of the city, can we put a conservation easement on the city right-of-way coming from Boucher Avenue to Wells Cove?
I mean, it's possible. I'm not saying we can't do it. It's possible.
I think it would be ideal to do that.
Yeah, maybe. I was thinking it may be different type of, not necessarily conservation. There may be different kinds of easements you could put on there that would.
Well, yeah, sure. We have access. The city has access easements. You know, we have access easements because of utilities and for other reasons. So it could be an access easement as well.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. And as far as Hawkins Cove, it's going through review right now with the trust, and it's on the same timeline as the projects the city's reviewing. So we'll likely find out if we have funding for a project there by the middle of May.
Okay.
So next month I'll have more to report on that.
All right.
All right. Thank
And
you.
I provided all of you with the 2.5-page list of Office of Environmental Policy / my new positions, FY21 accomplishments so far. And then I was pretty proud of how much we got done with 2 to 3 people over the last year. And then I also added in some priorities. So that's the list that I provided for the budget process. That was whittled down quite considerably for the budget book. And then I just added the priorities on it for your benefit.
One more thing I mentioned in passing, the no discharge zones came up in conversation last night on the policy board. I guess it'd be good to know where we are at.
Yes, that is, so the no discharge zone application, what passed through DNR, Maryland DNR, Maryland Department of the Environment, was sent on to EPA Region 3, where it was reviewed with a general yes, thumbs up recommendation for approval. They put it out for notice and comment. They received comments, and now it is just in the final phase of approval and whether they will approve it with conditions or put out any more comments about it. But we were expecting it, before spring, because we wanted to launch it with the spring boating season and do public education. And COVID has slowed down things quite considerably with the federal government. So I've been told it's any day now. We should know one way or another. But it looks like it's going to be approved. It's a very good chance.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, thank you, Ms. Giles, for your report. We're going to move on next to development update from Dr. Nash.
Hello, good afternoon. All right, for March, we have a new application in for 9 St. Mary's, which actually is now known as 99 Compromise, which used to be known as the city's old rec center. They had been approved for 9 units. They only built 7, but they're now proposing 1 additional unit. And 5 of those original units have been finalized so far.
Does this mean is it a major revision?
They have to go back to Board of Appeals to amend their special exception, but it is a minor site design that they're going to apply for.
Okay, and would this kick in any other requirement for MPDU? Because we lowered that to, I'm trying to remember, but we lowered that to 4 units or greater have to apply to MPDU. I'm trying to remember.
No, that it's still 9, so it is still 9. Okay.
Yeah. You'd have a problem with that. I'm sorry to interrupt. Is that going to HPC? That's
NHP.
Yeah.
After it gets its zoning approvals, it will go to HPC.
It's somewhat controversial because of the scale of it, from what I understand.
So is it going to add on to the building or
over the garage?
Pardon?
Over the garage? Just wave your hands. Yeah.
So I'm trying, is it still in the same envelope or are they expanding the envelope of the building?
It's in the same footprint. It's just they're building above the garage. I just saw a massing of it several weeks ago, but I think it changed since then.
We're still working with them on the design.
So does this mean it's not too late to take the building back?
You tell Jim O'Hare. Sorry.
All right. Hudson Street Public Works Facility was approved by Board of Appeals and Planning Commission. Public Works did a great job there with their presentations. Franklin Street, we're working towards finaling all those units. 100 Ridgely was also approved by Planning Commission. So they'll need to apply for permits. And I think I mentioned last time 101, 103 Annapolis was going to withdraw. They have formally withdrawn their project. 106, 108 Annapolis, however, has permits in that we're reviewing. We have a sort of new project. It's actually, they've been meeting for a while with the Alderwoman and kind of talking about this idea on Chinquapin and Lincoln Drive, but they're going forward now with a commercial building with retail, office space, and a warehouse. So that will be a new building there.
Dr. Nash, just quick on the other 106, 108 Annapolis Street. Are there going to be any issues there with large canopy street trees?
Well, the permits are under review, so I'm not sure. I'm sure Brian is looking at that permit. So we'll make sure we watch that. Kitty Academy, the one on West Street, they have a minor site design approval, which is good news. And that concludes my updates. Are there any other questions?
Circuit Court appeal of the Board of Appeals appeal for the Eastport Shopping Center. Do we have any update on where that is?
No, it's still, we asked for an extension to file the record because we hadn't received the transcripts yet. Now we have the transcripts. I think we've filed everything for the record, but I don't have any other update besides that.
Did I see something where Alan Hyatt is no longer the attorney for the appeal? There was something adding 2 new attorneys and that I saw float by.
I didn't see that. It's possible. I don't know.
Okay, thank you.
Alderwoman Tierney?
Yeah, I know I've asked this before, but what's the site at Spa Road and Hilltop? That piece of property, there's a sign.
That is...
Which one is that? Sorry.
That is called Primrose School. It's a early learning facility.
Yeah, okay. So nothing, what's the status of it other than there's a sign?
They're currently about to start their traffic study. They had a meeting for their forest conservation plan. That's probably going to be approved fairly soon. And there's still an issue with some of the, we're trying to see if they can shift the school a little bit to save 2 existing trees. And it's under review.
Whose ward is that? That's that area. Is it Sheila or Brooks?
That is Ward 5.
Okay.
You said it's Hilltop and Primrose?
No, it's Hilltop and Spa, but it is called Primrose School.
Yeah, it's a nice corner piece of property. I mean, it's been undeveloped for a while.
Across from the synagogue?
Yes.
I thought that was the Kitty Academy going in there.
No, Kitty Academy is moving from Forest Drive to West Street.
Okay. All right. Any other questions for Dr. Nash on this?
No.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Nash.
All right. Thank you.
I think we're going to move forward. I'd like to get the Tucker Street facility, the ordinance out of the way, and then we'll jump into the plan and zoning.
Is Beth back to help with the definition? Beth Bellis?
Yeah, we'll probably need Miss Bellis and
Here she is.
Mr. Braithwaite, if you're both available. And I think where we left it last time, we have I think we had 3 amendments. 2 amendments, it looks like.
We withdrew number 2.
I thought we had 1. Maybe we never got it drafted.
Takia? How far did we get?
Well, Ms. Bellis, can you give us a status on where this is?
I don't know where it is. I don't have a formal ruling from the Office of Law requested by Alderman Arnett. Perhaps Joelle can help with that. I saw the amendments. I weighed in. I think we were all in agreement that the discussion of taking the smaller craft to the beach was a good solution. It works very well at Truxton, so I can't imagine it wouldn't work well at Tucker Street. So in terms of like where the paperwork is, I couldn't answer that.
Okay, looking at it, I think amendments 3 and 4, the Tierney Payon amendments, I think are the ones that came out of our discussion at the last meeting. Is that?
Yeah, that was it was my attempt.
Yeah, and when I read through these, I think they address my concerns. So in that we have clearly distinguished to make it clear that it's just the motorized watercraft that would need to get the permit. And and then we're directing any of the small craft to the beach, which it's clearly stated that they don't need to get a permit to do that, I believe.
Right. But I guess there's my description of means the quote above ground structure specifically designed for launching a motorized watercraft is somewhat incorrect, Beth.
I think it complicates it. So I just think you just should say if you're launching I would use plain English. I would say if you're launching from the launching ramp, then you need to have a permit. But small craft should be launched from the beach, and those individuals do not need to have a permit or pay the fee. That's just my thought.
Oh, yeah, that's what it's supposed to say. I thought you had a problem with the way that the launching facility was described.
Well, because when you say you couldn't use the above ground part,
yeah, I
think some goofy person might argue that, well, the part that I used it's below the mean high tide, and so it's not above the water. Like it just, I don't know, it could unnecessarily complicate it.
Ms. Green, did you have something?
I was just answering the question. You guys approved or recommended favorably, Tierney Amendment 1.
Okay, so we just haven't gotten to the new amendments. Is that right?
I think what would be helpful to the group, if we have it, I don't know if we do, Rob, is just, do we have a copy that we could just present to the group where we can see exactly how it would read with the amendments?
Yeah, Julian, would you perchance be able to bring up, so we could bring up a copy of the, Ms. Alderman Tierney, would you like to have the amendments just put up?
So we don't.
Yeah, they're not.
What it would look like with the amendments.
Yeah, they're not integrated, Beth. They're still just separate. So, yeah, but where are we here? Two is withdrawn. So yeah, if we put up Amendment 3 and 4, we can address those.
I'll send them to you.
I already can propose a strikeout.
Thank you.
My belief is that if we saw them all together, we could quickly agree that it works.
Okay.
Yeah. So for the First Amendment, Amendment 3, that changes on the definition, I'm sorry, not the definition. Yeah, it does. The definition for commercial activity, it just adds that Tucker Street launching facility means the above ground structure specifically designed for launching a motorized watercraft and does not include any adjacent public beachfront used by non-motorized watercraft.
So maybe instead of saying above ground launching, you just say,
Just cross it out.
I would just cross that out and say it means the
Structure.
the boat ramp. It just means the boat ramp and not the adjacent area.
Okay. I was going to just cross out above ground to make it easier for Takia. Just means the structure specifically designed.
You could say you could probably just strike out the word above ground.
Yeah, let's do that. And that happens, Takia, that happens in a couple of places.
Can we just say boat ramp?
Need, you guys have to do a motion for one, and then also, if it shows up in a couple of different places, are you saying that you want to eliminate it from the entire?
Oh, no, just very simply, I would propose that at Amendment 3, I don't have a line reference, but just cross out above ground. So it just says means the structure. I'm kind of afraid if we call it a boat ramp, that might be.
So yeah, I would definitely need the page and the line if it's not going to be throughout the entire.
Yeah, I don't have a line reference on my Granicus, but it's it's 4 lines down in Amendment 3.
Yeah, so just strike up.
You're amending Amendment 3?
Yes.
I think Alderman Tierney, I think we'll just reintroduce Amendment 3, and we'll just reword it to say, make it a new amendment coming from the committee. So striking above ground, and I think that's wise because parts of the boat ramp go under the water.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I was looking at the wrong.
I don't know if that'd be considered above ground or not, but in any case, I think removing that would be good. So is that all you're suggesting, Alderwoman, is remove above ground?
Yes, please. It's
so when you make your motion, I guess for Ms. Green, we'll just make the motion the same as Amendment 3, except without above ground. Did you get that to you?
Yeah, in the as amended
Takia
portion.
We're getting the amendment up for you guys. You want it on the screen.
Okay. Yes, there is. So we'll
scroll up a little bit.
Yeah, well, you can see it there. Just remove the above ground. So what about in the? So I think that's all we need to do for that amendment. Is there anything else? Any other adjustments you want to make to that?
No, I hope the language, I know it could be simplified, but it's sort of legalese, but does not include any adjacent public beachfront used by non-motorized watercraft. So that was our attempt at delineating between the structure and the beach. Yeah. And then and
scroll down, Juliana, so we can see it as amended.
Yeah.
Before you go to 4, I might also suggest that you put in paragraph A1 in Amendment 3, specifically, it includes loading materials for waterfront work, because that is the only commercial thing that happens there all the time is companies come in with a barge and they load pilings and gravel and rock. So I know that it says it shall include it, but it's not limited to. It will make it more easily enforceable if it specifically says the thing that we have the biggest problem with. Okay. So I would say commercial activities shall include loading and unloading of marine maintenance materials or something.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Alderman Tierney, do you agree? Because if so, we can just have.
Oh, I wasn't. Yeah, no, that sounds like a problem. I wasn't aware. Wow.
Yeah, I think I remember the pictures that Ms. Bellis had shown us. I think the best way to deal with that is to create a new amendment, Amendment 5, that would just insert that language. So it would be on page 3 line. And for Ms. Green, I'm just this is for your sake, I think, page 3, line 35, after limited to, you would include the language, the quote. And what's your quote, Ms. Bellis?
I might have to Google something, but it should say commercial activity shall include, but is not limited to, loading and unloading of barges and vessels involved in, I can't think of what's.
We could probably just say loading and unloading of barges for commercial, for
commercial,
or just keep it as loading and unloading of barges, because that would be pretty broad. You don't want, I don't think you want
I like
barges.
it. Yes, you're right.
Barges, you're not going to have personally used barges, really.
Loading and unloading of barges and vessels.
And vessels.
For marine construction. That's what it should say.
How big a problem is this?
It happens probably a dozen times a year. And the reason it's such a problem is because it's very damaging. Those are really heavy trucks, these 18-wheelers that back down. And that ramp is not designed for that kind of traffic.
Wow.
And it's also blocks all their parking. That truck, when you back an 18-wheeler down full of heavy marine grade pilings, the amount of weight, and then it also obstructs that entire cul-de-sac for hours. And they're quite rude about it.
Alderman Arnett, you were trying to speak up. We couldn't hear you too well. Sorry.
I don't know what to do about that. I was wondering, where do these commercial activities go if they can't do it here? I mean, we're talking about the overall maritime environment in the city. People are doing pilings all the time. So I'm kind of curious why they're using this spot. And if they can't use this spot, where can they go?
I don't know the answer about where they can go. They might be able to go to Sandy Point State Park, but I can tell you that a spot as small as Tucker Street, no matter what we install, would be wholly unsuitable for that kind of weight and traffic.
Yeah. Okay,
I'm surprised they found it. It's such a narrow inlet.
There's a lot of money in Annapolis, and there's a lot of people making improvements to their waterfront. And so they don't want to be in rough water with a barge loaded down with construction materials. They want to do it in a way that's economically efficient and also doesn't beat them and their materials up.
Has that need been addressed to the Maritime Advisory? I mean, the task force? That sounds like there's a need there, and we don't want it at these smaller little.
I don't know that there's a need. Could truly be laziness or cost cutting. I couldn't answer.
Okay.
That's probably accurate. So, Ms. Green, for your sake, again, I'll repeat the amendment. So this would be Amendment 5 from the committee, page 3, line 35, after, quote, limited to, unquote, insert, quote, loading and unloading of barges and vessels for marine construction. Okay, thank you so much.
I know that seems small, but I think that's a nice improvement.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so can we go down to Amendment 4? Julian, can you scroll down a bit? I think this Amendment 4 just clarifies so what we're talking about in terms of I'm sorry, Alderwoman Tierney, if you want to speak up about this one. It's your amendment.
Yeah, no, this was brought up, and just to clarify what it is. And
And I had responded to Amendment 4, but I guess it didn't get included. We don't want the sticker on the watercraft because it's not enforceable that way. So what you want that to say, if the vehicle trailering the watercraft displays a current launch permit provided by the harbor master, and it needs to be in the driver's side window. Because if it's on the watercraft and then you call and complain, I don't know where that boat went. Now I can't find that person.
Okay, so for Ms. Green's sake, it's going to say on the third line, the trailer.
The vehicle trailering the watercraft
So the vehicle trailing the watercraft
shall display a current launch permit on the driver's side window provided by the harbor master.
Okay.
At all times during such launching and after the vessel is launched.
Okay. Did you get that? The screen? Okay. Can you say that one more time?
Sure.
Okay.
A person may only launch a boat or other watercraft from the Tucker Street launching facility if the vehicle towing the watercraft displays a current launch permit in the driver's side window provided by the harbor master at all times during such launching and after the launch.
So Takia, that's the rest of the amendment, the first two lines will remain the same. That's just going to change the last two.
Yeah, can you just email that to me?
I'll do it right now because otherwise I'm going to forget what I said. I'm going to do it right now.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I was wondering how they put a permit on a jet ski, sticker on a jet ski. So what's the reasoning, Beth, with it after the launch?
Because if you launch it and then you put it in your pocket or your wallet, and then a neighbor calls and complains, and then I show up, how can I tell if you had the permit or you didn't?
Okay, so keep it there. I got it.
So it's just like when you're parking in the city anywhere.
Right.
You need to keep your permit displayed the whole time you're parked in that area.
Yeah, I get it.
Okay, so I can't see everybody right now, and I think we'll keep this screen up to him for the time being. But Ms. Bells, let us know when you're ready when we can take this off the screen. But in the meantime, I can't see Alderman Arnett, so I don't know if you had anything else you wanted to chime in on these amendments.
Not on these amendments, but I still go back to the issue that I raised at the last meeting, which will affect the legislation, but it starts on page 3 at the top.
Okay, hold on, Arnett. Let's Ms. Bellis, have you finished your email? Can we take this off
I'm
the
going to
screen?
scratch it down on paper really fast.
And then we'll bring up the
And this
regular.
was for the as amended part of Amendment 4?
Yes.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's going to make it a little more. It's going to have to be Amendment 4 is going to have to be redrafted to take into consideration the added language. So I'm sorry. Yeah, I did give that to you the wrong way. It's going to be on. Let's see, page 3 of the ordinance, line 42. After I think is where the new language is going to get. So basically strike lines 42 and 43 and replace it with whatever the harbor master sends you.
Okay, I've got my work cut out for me. You can move on.
Okay, thank you. So Ms. Green, that's going to just be, I think, the new amendment from the committee, or I guess amendment.
Yeah, what are we doing? Amending the amendment or adding an
No, I think
amendment?
let's just make it a new amendment from the committee so we don't confuse
Yeah,
things
so
too
when
much.
you guys go to, because you haven't voted on any of them,
Okay. Oh.
these will become the committee's amendments because what is here is already Alderman
Published.
Tierney's amendments.
Yeah.
So anything
we-
that you change will become amendments from the committee.
Okay, so we'll have 3 new amendments from the committee. So, Alderman Arnett, before we get to yours, would you be okay if we moved on these 3 first to get them out of the way?
Yeah, although I suspect we'll come back. I mean, I guess I'm trying to figure out what the problem is that we're addressing, and then it's more comfortable to understand why we're doing all these amendments. I am gathering that there's a huge problem with too many people using the Tucker Street landing, setting aside commercial. I understand that to being too heavy for the ramp, but it feels, first of all, I'm really wondering if anybody's going to be there to monitor this stuff 24/7 when people are in and out. But it feels to me like it's limiting the ability for people to launch from this site. We only have two sites in all of the city to launch. And this one, it feels like we're ratcheting down considerably, which means we really only have one site.
Julian, can you take this off the screen so we can see each other again? And if I could try to paraphrase a bit or summarize a bit for, and then before we go to the harbor master, is I think the intention is that I think they're getting a lot of traffic at this ramp from commercial, but also from just larger vehicles out of cities that aren't vehicles that aren't necessarily from the city using this ramp. And I think having capacity for these vehicles to be permitted would allow the harbor master to make sure that appropriate vehicles are using this ramp. And it would also clearly, the language would clearly say that, because people were afraid we were going to be requiring all these small light craft to be permitted, and this would make a clear exception for that. But I guess the underlying intention, which maybe Ms. Bellis would want to speak a bit more to, is why you see it as being important to have a group of these vehicles be permitted.
So I would just, sort of expand on that, and that the residents are complaining that there are out-of-state vehicles and that there are parking issues to the extent that they have difficulty getting in and out of their driveways. They have said that there really isn't parking, but for less than half a dozen vehicles in that area. And so to open it to anyone, especially because the city's talking about putting in a brand new ramp with a floating pier and possibly some kayak racks, would exacerbate their problems. And they're pretty vocal about that.
Well, but how long has this ramp been then in existence? This Tucker Street ramp.
I'm sure it's been there a very long time.
Yeah. So a lot of the residents moved there with this ramp in place. I mean, this is the age-old tension between the residents and the users. And since, I could feel more comfortable about ratcheting down here if there were a lot of other places where people could launch boats. As one who has a trailer and a boat to launch, I have some very direct empathy for the boaters, and we're supposed to be a boating community. If we had in plans some notions that there could be other places to launch than these two places, maybe we could be more restrictive, since this is in the middle of a neighborhood as opposed to Truxton Park. But we're supposed to be a maritime community, and we're supposed to be encouraging boaters being able to enjoy the Annapolis waters. So, this all has a very restrictive feel to me. Even before we get to the question for Mr. Braithwaite about, can we constitutionally even limit public access to the water to just city residents? So, as we tighten this down and limit use, we are really severely limiting the use of boaters having access in Annapolis to the Annapolis waters.
Alderman, I'm sorry. Were you finished, Alderman?
Yes.
Alderman Tierney?
Yeah, I understand the overall, I know there's an issue about water access, but I think in this particular case, it is an existing ramp for residents' use, but I think we've distilled it down to a problem with the congestion, and with this code revision. I think that we've made it more applicable to the scale of the dock itself, and made it more efficient for that use to continue. I don't see it as restricting, because we're keeping it the same use, but we're implementing a code so that, you have a boat, you go here, you just have this, you can go to the beach side, and just make it a more efficient use for the betterment of the community with the congestion, but also to adapt it to the scale of this. We don't have the luxury of doing that everywhere, but that's the problem. But I think we have to be sensitive to the scale of this particular location. Is that fair to say?
I mean, my reaction, first of all, is I don't think it's only for the use of city residents. I think it's for the use of voters. Just like we're talking about water access coming from Boucher Avenue to Wells Cove, or water access going to Hawkins Cove. Water access is water access, and it's the same principle whether you're walking down a pier and launching a paddleboard or whether you're trying to launch a powerboat. And there just are not that many places, not only not in Annapolis, but even nearby Annapolis. So, you know, we're restricting this boating access, and restriction of water access is restriction of water access. And I don't know, I mean, thinking about Blue Heron condominium, I don't know that this is any bigger an imposition for the people in Ward 2 than having people walk behind your house on the city right-of-way going to water access at Wells Cove is any less of an imposition to those. So this is a trade-off. There's no doubt about it. There's a trade-off between for people to be able to get to the water, whether it's by just dangling their feet in the water or putting their kayak in the water or putting their outboard watercraft in the water. It's still all about water access. And, you know, I'll reserve until we hear from Mr. Braithwaite about limited to city residents, but I would say things on page 2 of 3 at the top and page 4 would have to change dramatically if we don't have the constitutional right to limit this to city residents only. And I think that the restriction is something I don't disagree with, is if you want to launch a boat here or anywhere else, you come to the harbor master and get a permit to launch the boat. And I think that that's a place where the harbor master would have the ability or the staff to say, we're already full up there. There's already 5 boats there, so we can't issue you a permit to put on your driver's side window because there's no room in the end there. And that would be a more appropriate way to limit the use of it than to put in code that it has to be a city resident only.
Well, so I think we do need to hear from Mr. Braithwaite, but just to chime in before that, I mean, personally, Alderman Arnett, I agree with you entirely in terms of wanting to support public water access, and I think I don't think this undermines public water access because I think we still are very open to, and we have expanded water access to the non-city residents, to anybody who wants to come, and that facility for them to come to is Truxton Park. And there are no limitations at Truxton Park. It has the infrastructure, has 2 ramps, I think now, but it's been improved. It can handle the weight, the traffic. There's no problem there. But the Tucker Street facility is much smaller. It's really a community ramp in practice because of its size. It can't handle all the traffic. The community can't handle all that traffic. And so I think we need to make some reasonable adjustments. And in this case, it's still completely open to city residents, completely open in terms of public water access. It's just the county. And I think it's reasonable for us to direct the county residents to this other facility that has the infrastructure to support it. This just, bottom line, does not have the infrastructure to support that kind of a use and so I think it's reasonable for us to put some certain limitations on it. But that said, is there any concern from the law office, Mr. Braithwaite, in terms of these limitations that we're proposing to put on this? I can't hear you. It says you're unmuted, but we can't hear you. Or I can't anyway.
Can't hear.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Great. Okay. So I spoke with the city attorney, and also Ashley Leonard from the Office of Law has been researching this particular topic. We have not found a constraint in Maryland law that would prevent you from limiting the use of our beaches or water access rather to residents only. So that's the office of law opinion, is that it is constitutional in Maryland because we have not found any limits in Maryland law. There are limits in other jurisdictions' laws, like Connecticut, for example, under the public access doctrine. But the public access doctrine is separate and distinct from what we have in Maryland, which is called the public trust doctrine. And the public trust doctrine is just about the public's right to accessing the portions of the water, or rather, as the median high tide, or whatever the case may be, in order to access the land that's revealed when we have low tide.
Thank you, Mr. Braithwaite. Any other thoughts from the committee after hearing that? Okay, any motion on this legislation then? Or yes, Alderwoman Tierney, do you have any motion?
I think I'll move that we recommend the legislation as amended, adding amendments 4 through 6.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah. Okay. Any second of that? If not, I'll second that. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, please say nay.
Okay.
Okay, the motion carries. Thank you all for your time on this. Thank you, Mr. Braithwaite, for that.
Did Alderman Arnett, did you say yes or nay?
You said nay.
No.
Nay.
No.
Okay, thank you.
There's a restriction of water access, so I can't support it.
And thank you, yeah, Mr. Braithwaite. That was very important to know. Thank you for all the research the office did. Okay, so and sorry, it seems like I'm trying to keep things moving. I wanted to make sure we had enough time to talk about the comp plan. I think that's next on the agenda if I can find where I put that on my desktop. Yes. So next up, I'd like to invite Dr. Nash, and do we have Eric? I'm blanking on Eric's last name, but is he joining us? Is he joining us as well? Excellent.
He is here.
I am here. Hey, hello, everyone.
Right. Take it away, Eric.
I hope you took notes on all that water access discussion.
We have backup materials to look at.
So, Eric, I know you sent out a large presentation, and I think it was the modified version of what you presented to the council as a whole, I think a week or so back.
I can share
what's your plan for, because I want to try to be really efficient with our time. So what's your plan for going through all this?
I was not going to present really at all. I was going to just kind of introduce where we are in the process and make sure we had enough time to just hear your concern, the things that you have to make sure, we focus on, that have robust guidance in the comp plan. And I can go to those sections, to kind of show you where we're at with those things.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds like a good plan. If you want to give us an overview, and then what we could do is, as long as Julian has or you, I don't know, so you're presenting. Yeah. So give the overview, and then we can jump to some of the goals, because there are various environmental aspects to a number of the goals. Not all of them, obviously, and not necessarily all the subject areas, but there's still a lot of overlap. So with that, if you could just kick it off, it'd be great.
Sure. So we're actively putting together a kind of public, sort of substantial public document content for the end of May that would basically be our draft goals, performance metrics, and recommended actions across the various topic areas of the comprehensive plan. That's something we want to release on our website for the comp plan at the end of May, and provide some backup in terms of the kind of analysis we've done to get to that. I guess the way I think about it is kind of a preliminary checkpoint for folks to kind of see where we are, what types of goals and recommendations we have to offer, and make sure that their priorities are being addressed. So there'll be an opportunity for comments to that. I want to stress that it's not the draft comp plan that would be required to have that 60-day review by the state. I think we're going to be basically putting everything into this same plan document format, but we won't be at that point yet. And so that would come essentially 2 months later. I think we're going to be at a better place to have updated the document. And so I need to maybe clarify the schedule a little bit, but the idea would be, to have this draft document, what's called final comp plan. It should be draft final comp plan. I mean, that's what we would be working towards the early fall to produce. And then the adoption process is sort of unclear, but having that draft final comp plan in the early fall would basically be the document that then has the 60-day review period. And when we want to start that is a question. So that's kind of just an overview of where we're at with the process. We continue to meet with a lot of different interest groups, neighborhood, organizations and individuals. And, I just would emphasize there's still, plenty of time to participate in this process. So we're going to be going to all the different city council committees, and this is the first one that we've met with. The presentation that I have here is essentially what we presented to the city council work session, the full city council work session a couple weeks ago. What I've done is just update with some of the additional goal and metric and recommendation language that we've developed since then from our consultants, and just from what we've heard from folks. I would say it was good to hear Jackie Gild's update, because a lot of what she talked about is stuff that we've added to this. I had a really productive conversation with Brian Adams about a week ago, where we kind of went over all of the things that she was talking about, how to address our tree canopy deficiency, and so we've put a lot of that in. We put a lot of that into the sensitive areas chapter, where you may recall we did highlight the data that has come out of the recent tree canopy study that it only goes to 2017, but that's the updated data we have. And so we all know that we have to find a way to make up this loss, and Brian and I discussed strategies for how to prioritize some areas of the city for new tree canopy expansion, and we've put that into the recommendations that are in the document that I sent you. I don't know if I want to say any more at this point. I could talk forever.
No, that's that's fine, Eric. And I think I do want to just start off, I guess, this part just again thanking you and Dr. Nash for taking this approach. I think it's great to be able to have these conversations with on the committee level with the staff. I think it'll really help make a document that we're all feeling connected to and a part of when this gets introduced. So I actually wanted, and for my colleagues, we can't see each other right now because this is on the screen, but if you have anything to speak up, but I'd like to start, I think, actually, Eric, if we could start a little bit at the beginning on page 12 on municipal growth.
Yeah.
Because I think, I think some of my comments overall is what you'll hear me kind of talk a bit about is there. I think some of the goals overall, I think this is there are a lot of great items listed in here. But I think one of the things I noticed even about the last comp plan is I think some of the goals in some senses are contradicting each other. And I think it'd be good if we could strive for some more synergy between some of the goals. And I'll explain more as we get into some of the comments. But to start off, I guess, so on this page under goal 2, I just wanted to comment on the designated growth area you mentioned. And I believe, and I could be wrong, it's been a while since I looked into this, but I thought that the entire city was a designated growth area in this, at least in terms of the state's perspective. So are you talking about here, are you narrowing that down for the city's purposes? Because I'm sure even though the state may paint us with a blanket, we may have our own specific areas we want to see either redeveloped or
we have a graphic that clarifies this. It is not the whole city. It is essentially the very few areas just outside of the city boundary that make sense to be annexed in the future. So there's a few properties along Route 2. There's a few kind of in-holdings near Bay Ridge Road and in your district along Edgewood.
So Alderman Savage, this is the mechanism that property owners outside of the city can be annexed into the city. But first, it has to be designated as a growth area in our comprehensive plan, i.e. an area the city wants to grow into. Okay. So the whole city is a priority funding area, which is the priority. I need a better word for priority, which is how the state designates the areas where it thinks that we should grow, where the state as a whole should grow. So the whole city is a PFA. And whenever we annex in new property, it becomes part of our PFA. We have to amend our PFA. But so this is another specific state designated area that just makes a property eligible for annexation. It doesn't even necessarily mean we will annex them because there's many, many steps involved in that process.
Okay, good to know. And since you mentioned Ward 7, I'll just, as you're, I think, aware, there are 2 properties I know in my ward that they're seeking annexation. One has Caliente Grill right on Bay Ridge there. It's already developed. The other is Cars Beach Community, I think it's called. Just it's this little block that's surrounded by city, but for some reason it was in the county, but it's a residential area, and they are seeking annexation because of the state of their septic and water, because they want those improved, I think, because it's been so long. So
right, so they would need to be included in our growth areas.
Okay,
but
that's something we could talk a bit more after, I think. Yes, Alderman Arnett.
So I'm glad we're starting here, and I wish we could drill into each of the goals specifically, but reading small towns, as we grow, we're acquiring more and more long-term liabilities. And so, I'm trying to figure out what is our growth philosophy. Taking on more infrastructure and adequate public facility requirements seems to me to be contraindicated in some of the growth philosophies. So, I just don't see a consistency here. In fact, I want to go back to the very basic question because I heard someone from the Office of Law, I think it was City Attorney Lyle, say, if you don't grow, you die. I challenge that. I think that we really need to go back to those very fundamental assumptions. Why is it that growth is necessary for sustainability? It may be necessary so more people can come into Annapolis and enjoy Annapolis, but I haven't seen the algorithms that say you have to keep growing and annexing to be sustainable.
Well, Well, Alderman Arnett, I'd say that we don't have to grow, but those choices that we have to make together as a city, because there are consequences if we don't grow, if our expenses continue. It's possible things like our traffic will continue to get worse, even if we don't add one new house in the city. So there's always these trade-offs, which is what this plan has to navigate. The growth area is to designate an area for annexation, which then gets weighed by a whole series of other factors when they're coming into the city. One would hope that the taxes and the water bills these people would pay would, cover the cost of including that area into the city, bringing that area into the city. If it's not, then that's an issue itself. I think you're talking more generally about number of people, but when we say growth, we mean number of people, but we also mean economically. If a city doesn't reinvest in itself and reinvent itself, then it will die. So it doesn't necessarily have to add a lot of new number of people to itself, but it has to find a way to make sure it doesn't stagnate.
So can you show me the algorithms that produce that? And in fact, in listening to what you just said, the way to solve traffic is to grow. And it seems to me a way to solve traffic is to not grow and in fact get smaller, or find alternatives. And you yourself and Eric have mentioned them when we're talking about the traffic, alternatives to vehicular travel. This is where I get very confused, because it seems like these ideas absolutely contradict themselves. So the way to solve traffic is to grow bigger. That feels to me like that's the way to grow traffic, not solve traffic. So I'm having a hard time understanding the very underlying principles that we're talking about here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I didn't say that growing. I didn't say that growing would make traffic worse. I said traffic could be worse even if we don't grow by one person. And that I think it is important to look at these alternatives that you mentioned if we want to alleviate that. And there might be some reasons we want additional people. And if we want additional people, then we'll need to find ways to alleviate the impacts of those new people and the traffic they're causing by providing more alternatives. So we'll have to leverage the investments that a developer makes in a private property with public investments that can benefit the people who are here now as well.
Yeah. So, goals 1 and 4 are really, those are the goals I just would say probably are most closely connected to what the growth philosophy needs to be. I mean, I think the other 2 goals here complement those, but it's really, really important to emphasize that when we talk about redevelopment in the city, it has to be on infill properties that are either not performing well for the city environmentally, fiscally. There's a lot of properties that you could say are not performing well in the city. And that's the kind of growth that I would like this comp plan to emphasize. It's not green. We have very few greenfield sites in the city. We need to be strategic about those. It's gray field sites, and that's really where the emphasis needs to be.
If I could just continue a little bit more on this, because we have competing goals, and I've subscribed to these goals, by the way, of creating more green space, and yet we want more people. I have my opponent in the primary has a goal of having 3,000 more affordable housing units in the city. We've grown since 1951 at about 100 persons per year on average. And then all of a sudden, to put in 3,000 affordable housing units with 2.3 or 2.1, whatever number you're going to use. I mean, that is a huge amount of growth. And it's growth with people who tend to be net users of service, not net payers of taxes. So like you have a Bill Kardash with a very expensive property, he's contributing a heck of a lot more in tax revenue than he's using. But when you bring in these mid-level or lower level people into the affordable housing, they're net consumers compared to what we get. And that one chart that you've shown, Eric, where you show the, I'm grasping for the name, but the, that we need to go to high density, basically. Yeah, I think that might be it. Yeah. I find that also very counterintuitive. It feels to me like we're not looking at who the actual people are in that tall column and what they're contributing in terms of revenue versus what they're consuming in terms of expenditures.
And I think if I could jump in before Eric responds, I think it would be helpful to, in this comp plan, to kind of define what you see as, for example, infill for first of all, because, I think in some ways, based on my understanding, infill means, in some ways it means, redeveloping vacant lots, but I think it can also mean, maybe I'm wrong, it can also mean developing lots that are currently forested and just not developed on. So I think your definition of that really can help us and the public, but also along the same lines, growth as well, because I know Alderman Gay is very pro-growth because he sees growth as jobs and opportunity for people. And I think from a lot of the constituents of Alderman Arnett and I, our constituents see that as traffic, overcrowded schools, degraded environment, right? And so, but I think we would both support redevelopment, right? At least within, if it meets our APF and that kind of thing. So I think even that definition of growth might help. And maybe it's defined in here, because I'll be honest, I didn't read through everything. I haven't read through any other draft besides this. I've tried to focus on the goals, but
yeah, that's a great point. And we do have a lot of narrative that's already been drafted, and I'll make sure that we have a very strong definite. In fact, the next time I give a presentation on this, I would want to have a clear definition of what we mean by, because it's tripping us up here. And I flashed to the draft land use map because it's really, really important to be clear about where that growth happens. It's not, your point about differing opinions across the city is well taken. I mean, it's very important to emphasize where the growth makes sense and where we have the infrastructure to support it. And that's something that we're putting in material on so that those investments make sense. It's I guess I would just say it's just not helpful in my mind to kind of talk about it as this as sort of vague thing that will happen everywhere. There are places in the city that are not going to grow. They don't make sense. So I just I owe it to you all, and in the next stuff that we prepare to kind of share better kind of the methodology for that, I think is.
Yeah, and I think that helps us to hear that, Eric. And I want to jump to Alderwoman Tierney. She's been patient with her hand up.
Oh, well, I was just going to be a little abstract on the idea of growth. Not growing is staying the same. And I think that's what I'm hearing from my colleague, Alderman Arnett. And then, if we don't grow, we may become smaller and less vibrant. Residents die or they migrate somewhere else. Businesses move or they close, and that we're going to find a lot of that post-pandemic. There'll be strips of opportunities for redevelopment, I'm sure, along West Street with the advent of office, being at home now, and we'll have these ugly vacant strip office things on West Street that cry out for redevelopment. I mean, a no growth policy would make us rather stagnant. And the other, the thing we have to realize is that Annapolis is an aging city. We have a very aging infrastructure. And if you bring up somebody that has a large house, we don't want them to accept all of the property tax. There is, it does lower the cost through this economy of scale of introducing some density where it's, where it can be applied. And I think that's what Eric is saying, that it is selective, and these opportune areas that always, scare all of us. It's this infill development is redevelopment. And with our strong environmental code, I believe that redevelopment is going to bring, actually introduce more green, more green space possibly, with some of the requirements that we have now with stormwater runoff. So I just would caution that we don't want to be stale, and we do want to, have more more social diversity, and more choices. And growth is the process of growing. And the indicators are sometimes scary, but that's what I trust the planning department will control. So that was my pep talk on smart development, not overdevelopment by any means, but I don't think that's what Eric is saying.
Yeah.
But if I could respond quickly, Eric, I think you're right. We need to have a much deeper dive to understand what kind of growth and where we're talking about it. But Alderwoman Tierney, just look at the language you use, stale. I mean, it's already putting a negative connotation on status quo. I think we can go around the country and find a lot of communities that are destination communities like ours, that are communities that have a unique physical location with water and peninsulas and things like that, that don't grow and are surviving quite well. So I don't see growth as the solution to the problems that we know we're hearing about from our constituents. And what are we hearing? Just as Alderman Savage enumerated, we're hearing traffic, we're hearing overcrowded schools, we're hearing that we have infrastructure that is failing in terms of streets needing more repairs, lack of sidewalks in neighborhoods. There's a whole panoply of things that are underlying our situation as a city. And to just say growth is what's going to solve that, I don't see the math of that. I don't see the algorithms that lead me to that conclusion.
Yeah.
Ed? Go ahead, Eric.
I just would say, this slide that we're looking at right now, I think is one of the best, it's not an algorithm, but, one of the best ways of explaining that when we concentrate compatible uses next to each other, where people don't have to get in their car to go somewhere that they might frequent, the city's getting a big win out of that, fiscally, environmentally, quality of life, and that's I think if there's like a takeaway from this discussion, I would hope that it is that we could be doing things more efficiently in certain parts of the city where, we have a sea of parking, and I wouldn't want to justify that that's the best use of that real estate for the city. And the alternative is to be more efficient in how we use that, and what better return on sort of our investment, so to speak. So that's, I guess that's what we mean by mixed use and in this comparison on this slide. I think there's relevance in Annapolis here.
So your column on the far right shows money, but to me, it shows Bethesda, Maryland, or Silver Spring. It's very high.
Skyline. I mean, it's just but I understand what you're saying.
Right, well, Ross. So we wouldn't propose something, that looks exactly like this. What we're really hoping to focus on with this comp plan is this missing middle housing, which are, much smaller, they could be single family attached. That provides an opportunity for home ownership, for people who are just beginning to get into the market. And for smaller units that would give people more options than what we have now. So we don't have to choose between, what's on the left and what's on the right. There's a whole spectrum of things in the middle that are more appropriate for Annapolis. This is just to kind of illustrate that, single family homes if you look at it per acre, those are expensive land uses for a city.
Yeah, I think that's certainly an important point. I think to Alderman Arnett's point, I think this graph has some value to it, but I think it doesn't factor in also the costs, right? Because each type of development has infrastructure costs associated with it as well. And I don't think we should necessarily be basing decisions based on how much property tax we're going to get, because if we base things purely on property tax and increasing property tax or land value, that ends up leading potentially to gentrification, and that's really works against some of our affordable housing goals. But I do think, Eric, I know again it's helpful to hear as you explain more about this, because maybe a lot of this is just semantics in terms of the disagreement we're having, or at least different views. Because maybe another word term for this, and I don't know if this makes sense necessarily, but instead of municipal growth, call it municipal improvement. Because again, I think we all want to see things be improved, be it again adding jobs, redeveloping. But that includes all those things, not to mention, just because I'm just being, honest, where my constituents and myself included tend to have developed this apprehension behind the word growth, because as an environmentalist, growth is really the antithesis to environmental protection. And so that's where I think it's semantics, but I think as you've explained yourself, it's not what you meant in terms of what I think environmentalists fear is not what you meant, and it's clearly not what I think what Dr. Nash and the department is the direction they're going.
No, I think that's a great idea. I mean, the reason why we call it this is because the state mandates a municipal growth element, but we certainly don't need to call our chapter municipal growth. We could call it whatever we want and have it serve as our municipal growth element. But so I think that's a great idea.
It is.
Alderwoman Tierney?
Yeah, because we're on this slide, I just wanted to introduce an Annapolis example of this, the first part, the Walmart. Look at the Taco Bell on West Street. If you've ever looked at it from both sides, it actually, the depth of it is a whole freaking block. and it's a so that's an example of the loss of efficiency I'm sure it needed all new lines going to it. Alice Pline brought that up to me, and I'll never forget that example of an inefficient development, if you will. And that's an argument for, more of a mixed use development of some sort rather than a standalone Taco Bell. Not that I don't like Taco Bell, but anyways.
And if I had one other comment on this section, if you could just, I guess, if you could jump to page 16 for goal 4, because I was thinking more about strategic infill development, and I think even that is again worth expanding on. And I see you have a lot to add to this page still, but so what I'm thinking of is, for example, is if we were able to annex, just as an example, the Caliente Grill property, right, that's already developed, I think it could use a lot of improvement in terms of aesthetically, in terms of making it mixed use. And then, that could also have along with it some kind of, environmental enhancement, right, to make that better for all. So I think that would certainly, I think, be a very strategic and appropriate place to have that kind of infill development. But like you've even said, there's some areas in the city where that doesn't necessarily make sense. But I just wanted to throw that out there for that section. Is there anything else on this section before we move on to the next? Okay. So I just in passing on page 20, I like how you incorporated the environmental enhancement into the fabric of this, because it's mentioned all over the presentation. So I think that's a great opportunity, because I think there are a number of and I'll get into that a bit more. But going on to the slide 21 for land use, I think a number of things to just to highlight again. I think these are great goals that we have identified. I had a couple questions for goal 3 under go to page 25, which has some of the details.
Yeah.
You mentioned, so for goal 3, identifying zoning language amendments that'll help bring about more housing options for workforce middle income. I'm just curious, and this goes back to kind of some of the density questions. For number 1, what were you thinking in terms of what kind of densities are you thinking about? Because I've noticed, for example, a shift in Eastport, and sorry to speak to your ward, but it's a good example, Ross, but where, you've had, in the past, you had kind of double, maybe even triple lots where you had a single house with an adjacent green open space. Sometimes there'd be large trees there. And I've noticed at least since I've been here, a lot of those lots are being fully subdivided is the wrong word, but they're being developed independently. And so in many cases, Eastport's kind of losing any benefits those empty lots would have provided, for example, if there were trees there or whatnot. But I'm just bringing that up to get a better understanding of what you're thinking in terms of is that an example of some of the change in density you might want to look that you're kind of talking about with this? Or?
Yeah, there's two. I guess there's I think of this in two directions. One is it's not really clarified here so much, but there are R3 currently is where the first level of residential zoning in our zoning code, where you start to see duplexes, triplexes. I think of these as kind of light density. There's a lot of great precedents for those types of housing in the city already. I just appreciating, in Ward 1, like the streets coming off of Inner West Street, have a lot of really great duplexes, triplexes. There may even be some fourplexes in there. So that's one aspect of it. And so there's a way, I think we need to be looking at places where some of that light increase in density might make sense. And in a lot of cases, the character doesn't change in the neighborhood. The architecture looks consistent. But then there's the sites that are existing, higher density or medium density. Think about like Admiral Farragut Apartments or Watergate Apartments. And that's where there may be potential to increase units with where there's adequate open space within the surroundings, and it's these are places that are close to existing infrastructure, but transit, bike and ped infrastructure, and commercial, and so that's kind of the other side of it, where we could gain additional units, and it's not going to have I think it's we can accommodate that.
So Eric, how is it going in Minneapolis? Because they eliminated all single family zoning. You can go up to 4 units. I've seen some pictures of some beautiful old neighborhoods, the kinds you could envision in Ward 1, and right next to it, some ultra-modern quadruplexes. I mean, it's hard to argue that the character of that neighborhood hasn't changed and changed dramatically. So, there are aesthetic qualities that make Annapolis what it is, and its neighborhoods what they are. And to just throw that out to achieve the second bullet point on the left-hand side of the page, where we're increasing the number of units on a lot. My street is actually a great example of this, Rob. You weren't wrong in thinking about Ward 8. So on my block, the 500 block of 6th Street, on the other side of the street for me, there are several houses that are almost, or yards, properties, that are almost double unit wide. So those would be ripe for subdividing and putting in another unit. And those are also properties that have, most of them anyway, an alleyway behind them with a garage. So you could argue that there's ample parking there. And it could well be, if you were to mimic the style of the existing houses, that could be an increase in the number of units in a nice neighborhood without disrupting the community character. Now, all of that assumes that the property owners want to go in that direction. On the other hand, on the next street over, Burnside, where there's similar kinds of arrangements, we've already had a long-standing battle. Dr. Nash can tell you the war stories of 518 Burnside, where we had a traditional Victorian farmhouse that someone wanted to tear down and put in a Spanish hacienda. That kind of development does not keep the community character and does great. And we had at 521 Burnside a major expansion in the size of the house on the lot. That was a very controversial. It was the first test of the 3250 rule. In actuality, that house fits in quite nicely. Most people, a lot of new neighbors on that street, don't even know about the controversy that house created. And ironically enough, it was a couple. Unfortunately, the spouse has died, and so it's only one person living there, but it was built to house 8 children. So I think for all of these things, it's the devil's in the detail. And moving away from Euclidean zoning and very specific kinds of things, I think we invite having a hodgepodge and disrupting neighborhoods. So I think this has to be done extremely carefully. And I almost would argue requires more rules, not less rules. If you're going to preserve what is Annapolis right now, if we want to go, my wife grew up in Silver Spring. If we want to go to that model, if you want to go to the Chevy Chase, Bethesda model, have at it. But I don't want to live in that Annapolis. I think and I don't think most of the people who live in Annapolis want to live in that Annapolis either. So, this is one of those, throw the baby out with the bathwater kind of thing. I don't know how we do it carefully. And I agree.
I agree with everything you said. I mean, we certainly would need to have guidelines, and we do. I mean, there's a lot of, as you know, there a lot of the uses that are allowed in our zoning code currently come with standards, and So we would certainly need to have those standards in place to ensure, compatibility. And I think that would be needed to get public confidence in this. I have to see what has happened in Minneapolis since that law was passed, but we're not going to be outlawing single family zoning in the city. And I don't think that's...
There's not accessory dwelling unit legislation on the books right now, ready for us to adjudicate, which gets rid of all single family zones?
Wait, let's not get into it. Well, to kind of bridge that comment, though, Eric, I want to ask you a question, though, because about the what you envision for this, and Dr. Nash, because how does this how would it work? Because I'm guessing, instead of just kind of blanket changing zoning, would there be a way to kind of phase it in, see how it works? So for example, I don't know, not like this would happen, but because I think, for example, what you're saying earlier about duplexes and allowing that in some areas, that can be done very well. I point to Mariner's Point in my ward. It has a very residential feel. I think it has I think that ended up coming out very well and fits in very nicely with the community. But I'm just wondering if there's a way, if you did this, would you have it be where, if people were to convert their houses or build new houses, that it could only be you'd only have a few at a time that could, for example, convert to multifamily housing? Or would it be a mass rezoning at once where you say, okay, now all the R1 zones can now automatically be whatever R4 or be multifamily? I'm just wondering if there's a way to do that that's more organic, but maybe it'd be more organic anyway, because it's not like people would do this en masse. There's just we just don't have housing stock that's for sale like that, or room to build anything like this. But I think doing it in a slower pace would certainly address and give us a chance to address any other infrastructure issues. But I guess the bigger question might be what Alderman Arnett was saying in terms of doing that in a way that maintains the community character. And because I don't think this is necessarily as much of an environmental concern, but I think just the whole idea of what we mean, growth itself and development itself, I think is central to the environmental issue. Alderwoman Tierney, yes, so you had.
Yeah. Okay. This is where I get a little bit crazy. I know you've heard me say we should wait for the comp plan to do this, and I can cite two examples, and I have to, the marijuana dispensaries and the accessory dwelling units, because they involve a why. We can answer the why. Yes, we need them. Yes, we do. Everyone agrees we need to provide housing, but the where, and I just don't understand why we dive into these things when we really haven't thought it out, and that's what I look at the comprehensive plan for. So, for example, when I look at this goal number 3, I say there's no way that how do you address, we have to, it's out there, the accessory dwelling unit. How do we have that address this goal? Because we have all these different areas, they all have different characters or whatever. And to do a blanket, it's really the cart before the horse, I guess. I mean, to do a blanket citywide legislation for both without really understanding it and mapping it out, which I believe the comprehensive plan does. I don't put that much, I guess the word is trust in the fact that you're going to actually lay out where things go and stuff like that. But at least it gets us thinking logically about the wheres and the hows. I mean, and again, I understand the whys. I understand why we need dispensaries. I understand why we need accessory dwelling units. But I really look at the comp plan to evaluate the wheres and the hows. And I guess that's just an editorial. But am I right? I mean, you're asking questions here. But we have legislation that's going to probably, I don't know.
Well, I think you're right. I think we do need to let the comp plan guide it. And And
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, I don't want to. I don't want to.
I know.
Too many
I'm just,
rabbit holes. I do want to.
yeah, I know.
I know it's easy for us.
It's just,
to do
I'm just
with,
about, yeah, I'm just talking about a linear process, really.
Yeah. No, I think that's
because it works sometimes.
I think it's the point.
Right.
And
So the comp plan works best when it's used to set the priorities of city council, and then the staff uses those priorities to figure out ordinances and other ways of implementing those priorities.
Right.
And it's possible, though, that since we only do the plan every 10 years, policies change, priorities change, people change. And so it doesn't do a great job in keeping up with the the kids these days. And I think that's where we get into log jams, is when the policy and the priority isn't clear. There's not a clear consensus. You might all agree on the why, but you certainly don't all agree on the how, and that's an important part of the policy. So it's that is the whole reason we do these plans and why they're so important, and also the shortcomings of doing them every 10 years. Not that I'm volunteering to do it more often.
Yeah, don't do that. Don't go there.
Thank you. Alderman Wright?
I hate to disillusion, but I don't think we even agree on the whys. So, I mean, dispensaries, I don't even know if we have any control over that. But I don't agree that we need more housing in Annapolis. It is for the people who want to knock on the door and come in. And I know how terribly NIMBY-ish that sounds, but they come in at the cost of the people who are here now. So when you put more houses on a block, you have changed that block. And I think that we're talking about some underlying market forces that we're just not factoring into it. So if you double the number of houses on my block, I will try to anticipate that, get my house on the market as fast as I can, and go move to Bethesda. Might as well just jump into the thick of it. But look at what
Alderman Arnett, I think we should talk about that, because I think it's important to think about this not as a net gain or loss, but that changes can have different impacts that affect people in different ways. And you might see one new person as a negative, but what if that means your child can now live near you? What if that means your mother can afford a place within walking distance to your house? There are ways to imagine. If you imagine the person, him or herself, who might move there, it is not going to be a negative impact. That person might have some great contribution to make to the city overall. And we don't want to close ourselves off to the populations to the possibilities, because we're afraid of the negative impacts, when we know we can mitigate the negative impacts if we can reach some kind of consensus on some of these ideas. So I think it's important to think of it in a more personal terms of who those people are. They're not just faceless people trying to destroy your way of life.
Every one of my constituents thinks of this in personal terms. What does it do to them, their house, their neighborhood? And I would argue that growing the city is going to have all kinds of impacts on the people who chose to be here in the first place. And some of them, in fact, maybe many of them, will choose not to be here. And now you need to start to think about, what does that do to the real estate? Now, it could be that every Ross Arnett that moves out of the city gets reoccupied by the next wonderful person, or two people or whatever, and it's a positive. But it could also be that it makes Annapolis a less desirable place to be. So that's why I harken back to what Ellie was saying. It does feel to me that we have to have a much more prescriptive, much more cautious, not just plunge into this in a global way, And I think Alderman Savage, Rob, you were sort of suggesting this too, that maybe we start to look at more specific places where we try some of these ideas out. And I'm willing to bet you that whatever neighborhood you go to, there's going to be a lot of resistance to change, a lot of resistance to them being the guinea pig. I keep thinking about Tyler Avenue and the huge yards there with very small buildings on it. And I keep thinking of that as an area where you could redevelop, you could build a better stock of housing, you could subdivide lots, and you could maybe have multifamily units there. And maybe that community, because they tend to be a lot of renters, isn't going to be a problem. But I think every single neighborhood you go to and want to touch is going to have its own flavor, its own druthers. And unfortunately, I think people will react to the specter of what they think could happen rather than the reality. And that's why I hearken to Minneapolis. It would be interesting to see what's happened in neighborhoods that have thrown out single family zoning. There are a lot of social questions about the value of single family in terms of its impact on social structure. There are some countervailing ones. Having a larger yard is a better sink for water runoff. So, you have to put all of those things into the package when you think about them. But frankly, my observation of the comp plan is the people who have used the comp plan the most have been the developers who always cite the sections of the comp plan that justify their use or their particular project. I don't see the goal sitting on the city council desk, which is also the desk for the planning commission. There's also the desk for the Board of Appeals. I see it most often used by the developers who want to come in and make big change. And I really don't want this document to become that kind of a document.
Well, so Alderman, I a couple things. I think on that, I think to connect it back to the environment, I think that one of the concerns is that what we've been trying to get at is when can you increase density? And in some cases, you can. Some places you may not be able to, but can you increase density without impacting the environment? Because if you do go on there and create a duplex, presumably you may, not necessarily, but if you make it affordable, I guess you could make them smaller places. But in any case, how can you make sure they're not going to be having to clear down trees to add more impervious surface when they increase that density, right? And that's where kind of one of my comments at the very beginning was the synergy between the goals. And I'll get into that later on much more, but also before I yield the floor, I also want to say to my colleagues and to staff that we're not going to be able to get through all this today. I think we could maybe finish up this section on land use, but I think, because I know Alderman Arnett, and staff too, have had a very long day. So I'd probably prefer, and if my colleagues would be open to this, to scheduling a special meeting next week or the week after. I think it'd be better to split this up into a couple meetings because we're only about a third through my comments, if that, and we haven't even opened the floor to you two in terms of your individual comments on this section. So is that, I guess, first of all, to my colleagues on the committee, what are your thoughts on that special meeting? Or
I was to help Eric and Sally out. I was wondering if they had plans to present to the Annapolis Environmental Commission, and if there was some way that can be joined.
Well, that's what Jackie mentioned, is that May 5th meeting, and so I think it would probably benefit both entities if we could get a meeting before that to go over, because I think that way. I'm sure the Environmental Commission is going to have a lot of the similar comments, and it would give, I think, staff a chance to kind of digest some of the things we've said, and they can work that into their presentation with the Environmental Commission. But staff, what are your thoughts on that?
have no problem personally meeting again prior to May 5th. I understand why we've been focusing on these earlier elements. They're pretty important. And I should have mentioned earlier that we have a whole chapter dedicated to housing. So a lot of the stuff in here that references housing gets kind of fleshed out more in the housing section.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah.
Yeah, and that's good. I'm wary again of going too far off track.
Yeah.
But it is related, so I think it's important. Yeah. And I think so we don't end on a
go to the next goal.
I want to go to goal 6, page 28.
There you go.
If we can, because I think there are a lot of great items on this one in terms of so on item 3, requiring public access easements be established or planted. And I think that's a great item to have there. 5, also using the forest conservation requirements to direct conservation of afforestation. And also 6, amending the zoning ordinance to apply environmental enhancement areas. And so I think there are a lot of great items in here. And I think one idea for 4 I had for 4 talks about designating certain streets to be part of the Greenway plan, doing plantings along them. One thing I want to throw out there is I really like this idea, and I think if incorporating an idea, perhaps along the lines of calming. I'm trying to think of the planning term for it, but like calming streets, where for one example would be Edgewood Road, where I get complaints all the time about the speed of traffic going down that road because it's a wider road, and so people do kind of tend to go faster than the 25 mile per hour. I think it's 25 or 30, but anyway, they go faster than that. And I know the city doesn't put in traffic calming devices, but I kind of like there are some streets like that where I think, like they did in Eastport on Bay Ridge, where you kind of, get that street's wide enough. What I'm trying to get at is I think you could keep a bike lane there, but also create maybe bump outs where you could add street trees, which would also further the canopy goal, that kind of thing. And when you narrow it, I know that the whole concept is it kind of forces traffic to slow down. So I don't know if that'd be something that you could, there are probably other streets I'm not thinking of where you could kind of take that similar approach, but just wanted to throw that out there for you.
That's a great point. I think one thing I talked with Brian about is just the value in focusing on places that have kind of residential support. There's a huge need on commercial street, or major thoroughfares. Obviously, that's West Street, Forest Drive, et cetera. These are kind of our heat islands, but we probably have the best chance of stewarding these new trees in the residential communities, the places where people can really see the value in them and help take care of them. And Edgewood Road, is a pretty good example of that, I think.
Which road?
Edgewood. And can you go back to slide 21, just for my colleagues' sakes, if you have any other comments on this section?
We have 2 slides.
The land use section. Yeah. We'll go to the next page on anybody. Any colleagues have any?
So no, I'd like to go back to goal 1 because I think that speaks to what Ellie brought up, and certainly what I think is valuable on the preceding page. The critical word there is guide, and I think that is where people are going to find their comfort level if they understand what the rules are about infill redevelopment. The guidelines. I was thinking while we were talking about it earlier, this is starting to become quite in vogue, but maybe we need every change in a neighborhood, every accessory dwelling unit to be a special exception. I think we'll have to have like 10 boards of appeals to handle all of those, but I think it's more important to get the guidelines and to eliminate the specter, because when it's threatening your neighborhood, and I think that is how people feel about it, they want to know what the rules are. They want to know what could happen to them. So that word guide or guideline, I think, is a critical thing to demystify and I'm trying to think of the right, villainize, whatever the right word is, these plans for change, because that's what we are talking about. We're talking about plans for change. We wouldn't need a comp plan if we're just keeping everything the way it is. You don't need to have any rules. I mean, it's staying the same. So all of this is about change, and all of it is change that comes with it the specter of, could be bad change and could hurt me, or could be something I don't like. So that word guide or guideline, I think, is a critical thing to flesh out much more in that goal. And then, as Rob, you said earlier, what is redevelopment? Is it developing a vacant lot, or is it taking a dilapidated house, or again, using my example on the road there, the Tyler Avenue, where you have really very small houses. They are part of the character of that community, by the way, but those are certainly ripe to be made much bigger on their lots and still not even come close to the 50% permeable requirement. And as I keep warning Dewan, I think that is a big target in Ward 6 for redevelopment, and that's fine. But redevelopment with a set of rules of the road, I think, is what can make this feel much more palatable.
Yeah, well, thank you, Alderman. And Alderwoman, did you have anything else on this section?
I just want to say that I love the language. I mean, I love what it's saying. And I just don't know how you fit the code into that. It's just, but that's next.
The challenging part.
Yeah, it's a challenging part. But yeah.
So I think I'd like to push things if people are willing, just to do one more transportation section, because I don't think we have too much. I think we could, let me know if you want to do some things differently, but I think we could skip over the housing section. We've already chatted about that a bit. Transportation section, there's Takia has something end at 5:30. Okay. Well, let me just say real quick on transportation that on page 45, I think generally in this section, I think we should work in some of the the goals to work towards electrification. But I think in terms of these goals 2 and 3 on this page, they're really oriented on, the comments are oriented on downtown public charging stations. And I think that's really more geared towards tourists. Speaking as somebody who owns an electric vehicle, and I rarely use any kind of charger downtown. I always charge at home. So I think the emphasis needs to be placed on what do we need to do to revise, how do we handle this on residential streets in terms of what are we doing to change the code to allow people to install, how are we going to coordinate these with bike lanes and sidewalks in terms of installing residential charging stations? What are we doing with multifamily homes? Are we going to require that they have to put in electric charging stations when their residents, like in an apartment, has an electric vehicle? They need to be able to charge that. But in terms of residential streets, such as in Eastport or Ward 1, when somebody has a charger, puts it in, they may not have a garage, so they have to put it on the street. Will they be guaranteed that spot so they can get charged in that? I think we need some flexibility in our parking law. So that's just, I want to just throw that out there for perhaps some reorientation on that. But he is telling me we have to end at 5:30. So I guess we will.
Okay.
So any other quick comment on that, the EV, before we?
Did you have plans? Excuse me. Did you have plans to present to the transportation committee, Eric and Sally?
Yes. Well, we don't have a date. I mean, at the next meeting that they have, which I think is early May, that was what we were, or maybe it's mid-May. I don't think they have one till then, but that, yeah.
Okay.
Is that right, Ellie?
The second Thursday, and they're going to be going in front of each committee.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
We asked Takia to put us on every committee agenda.
Okay. Well, Kurt Riegel from the board attends the committee meeting. So
Okay,
that's
Eric has also gone to the board.
Yeah, I've talked to the transportation board a few times, and I really value.
I think I was there.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Sorry, I was there. Yeah.
Particularly around transit, they've been very helpful. Their insights that they have, I think, are really helpful to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Eric, in terms of the comments about electric vehicles, I to be frank, I plan on introducing legislation probably next term. But I think if there's anything that you or Dr. Nash discover in terms of the larger implications, the larger changes we may need to make in terms of the zoning or things that other jurisdictions may have encountered. But those are things I had somebody just this weekend come up to me. It was at a local EV show, just asking about how to handle it on residential streets because she wants to put in a charger, but what if her neighbor's parked there and she can't charge her car? That's some of the things we need to start thinking about. Eventually, everybody's going to have one, and it's not going to be as much of an issue. But we still may want to put in shared chargers on streets. But anyway, just bigger picture to think about. So in terms of first, I want to thank everybody. I know you've had a very long day, and I thank you both for going to all these meetings to hear us on this and hear the public. Because I really think, and as I mentioned to Ross earlier and Ellie, in many ways, I think this is even more important than the budget. I know the budget's the hot item, but this is something that's going to last 10 years. It's guiding everything for 10 years. And I think it's really worth us taking the time to talk about this. So I really want to thank you for putting all the extra effort on this, because I'm really, I think this is really going in a good direction.
Thank you all for your time and your comments.
Yeah, it looks great.
So with that said, I think, Takia, do we have time to schedule something, or do we need to get off right now?
You can go ahead and schedule.
Okay, so I'm looking at, I guess, my colleagues and Takia for opening, but
you mean an opening for April?
Yeah, if we have anything next week around the same time would be ideal, but it doesn't have to be. But I'm looking at maybe, I know we already have meetings on Tuesday, but I think pretty much any time that week except for Thursday, we have a work session on the Peace Act or Peace Ordinance.
Yeah, we have finance every day.
Yeah, we can't change that, but or get around that, I guess. But that's why I think it's better to split it up so Ross and staff get a break. Ross, you're muted. I can see you saying something.
What's the work session on Thursday? I don't have that on my calendar.
It's a special work session. That's the one you guys requested.
Yeah, Peace Ordinance on Thursday next week and then Thursday the week after. We've got a busy schedule this month.
All right. I need to figure out what's wrong with my calendar.
5, but it's a hard stop at 5.
If we do Wednesday, it would have to be, it can be from 3 to 5, but you have to definitely end at 5.
I think that's fine. I think we could do this in 2 hours. We've gotten through roughly half of the document, so
we won't digress.
Yeah. So yeah, does that work for my colleagues tentatively?
Yes.
What's the date of that? What is that?
28th.
The 28th.
From 3 to 5.
28th or the 29th?
The 28th.
Yeah, I'm being called into the principal's office from 2 to 2:30, i.e. Michael Lyles.
That's good for me.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, that's does that work for staff then? Mm-hmm. Okay. Excellent. Well, anything else from my colleagues on this?
No.
All right, can I get a motion to adjourn?
I motion that we adjourn. courtesy to Fred Pam.
Ross wants to stay even longer, it looks like. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And thank you, Ms. Green, Julian, everyone else.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.
Thank you.